With us, Mr. Steve Usdin, the Washington editor of BioCentury, who joins in. To give you a brief, Steve is the senior editor and Washington editor of BioCentury, which is a pharma publication since 1993, and he's been covering life sciences sector for the last 20 years. Another feather in his cap is that he's the first journalist to have received the Willie Award in the United States. Steve, thank you very much for joining in with your deep perspective about US healthcare. So let's start with that. What are the near-term or immediate measures that Trump could roll out when it does come to healthcare in the US?
So I think that the first thing is something that we're likely to see next week, if not next week, the week after, which is going to be Trump's appointment of an FDA commissioner. The relationship between regulated industry and the FDA is the most important thing for shaping the present and the future of the pharmaceutical market in the United States. And there's a lot of at stake in who the administration appoints as the next FDA commissioner. There are a couple of candidates. If you want, we could talk about who they are. The second thing that's going to be really important is going to be what's going to happen on drug price controls. President Trump has been very adamant and said repeatedly that he thinks that drug prices in the United States are too high, that there should be more competition, and that there should be negotiation of prices that are drug prices that are paid by Medicare and Medicaid. All of those things and the details of all of how those things work out are going to shape the entire market for pharmaceuticals in the United States, again, both for innovative products and for generic products.
Steve, could you talk to us about who the potential candidates for the FDA commissioner are? I mean, essentially, what are the big changes we can expect in regulation when the new person takes charge?
So there are two people who have been discussed in the media, and again, this is everything that's happening and kind of swirling around President Trump in the White House right now involves a lot of rumors and a lot of uncertainty. But the best information we have is that there are two candidates. One of them is Dr. Scott Gottlieb. He's a former senior FDA official, and the other one is a guy named Jim O'Neill, who's close to Peter Thiel, the Silicon Valley investor. And they really represent very different visions for what the FDA should be and for what drug regulation should be. Dr. Gottlieb, again, has got lengthy experience at FDA, also at Medicare with the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services. And he represents kind of continuity in some senses, but also I think that he has an emphasis on pushing regulatory policies that are going to advance innovation. He's really the choice of the drug industry. Jim O'Neill, if he were to become the FDA commissioner, would be the first FDA commissioner since the late 1950s who didn't have either an MD or a PhD degree. He's made statements that are frankly alarming for both for regulated industry and for public health groups about wanting to deregulate the FDA in ways that would lower the standards for efficacy and push drugs out based solely on safety data.
Okay, fair enough. Steve, that's on the FDA head, the likely one. But the other key point of contention is drug pricing. When Trump vows to bring down drug prices in the US, is it more for branded drugs? How do you suppose he will reduce drug prices in the US?
So I think that, no, when Trump and when members of Congress are talking about bringing down drug pricing, they're certainly not only talking about new drugs or innovative drugs, they're also talking about generic drugs. Some of the biggest scandals or controversies in the United States have been about price increases on generic drugs that are in short supply. So there's a concern there. I think in the bigger picture, it's still very uncertain exactly what the Trump administration is going to do to carry through on the promises that Trump has made about lowering drug prices. He's repeatedly talked about negotiating or bidding for drug prices that the government purchases for Medicare and for Medicaid.
Steve, so that is essentially the next question. I mean, how will Medicare negotiating directly impact players like Indian pharmaceutical companies? Indian pharma companies tell us that they will actually benefit because pricing will, I mean, they're competitive on pricing.
If you had drug price negotiation like that, I would see that the main impact is going to be on innovators. The generic companies would be impacted only to the extent that there are these outlier generic drugs that have de facto monopolies, either because of shortages or because they're the only competitor that's in the marketplace.
Okay. The other big issue right now is the border tax, Steve. What is the probability of a border tax? Because essentially it works against the fabric of lowering drug prices eventually.
Well, there's going to be a border tax, or what they call a border adjustment tax. And again, this is something where President Trump has staked his reputation and he's campaigned on it. He's almost certain to get something that's called a border tax. What nobody knows at this point is exactly how that's going to work. And you know, there's an army of lobbyists in Washington that are trying to shape the way that the border tax works so that it doesn't hurt their interests, or the interests of the companies that they represent. So that it's an enormous unknown as to whether the border tax will be implemented in a way that would affect imports of generic drugs, imports of active pharmaceutical ingredients, or imports of finished drug products, of innovative drugs. Again, that's one of these huge unknowns. Nobody knows how it's going to work. It's virtually certain that there will be something that we called a border tax, but how that's going to affect generic drug companies is an enormous uncertainty.
Steve, it's a pleasure. Thank you very much for providing